GSP is back, and now he's fighting Michael Bisping for the strap.
Yeah, big news 2 days ago, but we haven't been in front of the audience, so I'll agree with you. Listen, I got a couple of feels on that, Joel. I mean, right out of the gate, and you'll recall, that is the fight I predicted. I think you predicted it was going to be Diaz. I predicted that it would be Bisping was the most likely, so good for me, got one right. But I also predicted that I would prefer it be Anderson Silva. That fight was talked about for a long time. George isn't the champ. Anderson isn't the champ. It would make good timing-wise sense to get that done. Business-wise makes good sense. You had then brought up Conor McGregor's name. Well, that would be the biggest fight in the history of the sport. I liked that as well, and I think Conor's crazy enough to do it, and I know George would do it. So then I started to think, well, maybe it's going to go in that direction. I know George specifically wanted to fight Bisping. World title fight, different weight class, a lot of meaning on that. And he likes the matchup. Bisping really wants to fight George St. Pierre because the way his contract is structured as being champion, I mean, he's staring, if I was even to tell you how many millions of dollars down the pike on the back end on pay-per-view bonuses, it'd blow your mind. So Bisping wanted that fight too, and I know that they did their level best to politic and to get it. I'm excited for the match. The return of George St. Pierre is exciting. In the wake of the matches that we just discussed and hypothesized about, George St. Pierre, the parody of him and Anderson Silva finally happening. The parody of George St. Pierre versus Conor McGregor finally happening. The greatest of all time versus the greatest of this time. Really, really big business and really compelling matchups. Of those matchups, this is the least intriguing to me as far as getting a buzz and excitement and wanting to know where it is. I think it was interesting that this broke on SportsCenter. I think it was interesting that this broke 48 hours ago. And nowhere without a search can you find a story about this. It has been buried that far down on all of the MMA sites. They are going to need to spend a lot of money and do a lot of promotion to make this a mega fight. This is a big fight either way. I'm not pissing on this fight. In fairness, as far as the matchups that we thought we could have, this one's a little bit weird, and it's also interesting in that, what is George's play? Not what is George telling the guys in the office to get his way and get this done. What is his actual mindset? If he was to capture a 185-pound championship, and all I can do, anytime we sit down here and speculate and guess, is put myself in his shoes and think, what would I do? And then assume that the other guy is going to do that same thing. So if you take George St. Pierre, does he like the matchup with Bisping? Yeah. George, most effective MMA wrestler to have ever done it against Bisping, who's not a wrestler. I think that George really likes that. Middleweight championship, main event, big money fight. George likes all of those things. Does George like the next step should he become the champion? Does he want to fight a guy like Yoel Romero, who is just simply huge in comparison to George? George is a welterweight and even talked about being a lightweight. George's words was that I might come back at lightweight. Now, I think that's where some of the Conor talk came in. George has never speculated about going up to 185. In fact, when it was discussed that he would go to 185, it was done one time for one opponent, which was Anderson Silva, and George said he's just too big. If I'm going to do that fight, I need an ample amount of time. I need to sign a contract, and then that fight needs to be 10 months away so that I can change my body and get big enough for that fight. He didn't like it. So, take Bisping out. Let's say George beats him and gets past him. Does George want to fight Yoel Romero? Does he want to fight Jacare? Does he want to fight Chris Weidman, who could be a light heavyweight today? Does he want to fight Gegard Mousasi, who up until 15 months ago was a light heavyweight, and as much as 36 months ago was even in the heavyweight division over in Japan? Does he want to fight with those guys, or is this a case where he comes in, he grabs the money, he solidifies his legacy? Not that it was ever in question, but he solidifies it in absolute stone and walks away. And I think that's where a chess player is taking a gamble.
I think that, when this news broke, I said, okay, you called this, and then you were like, that's not the biggest fight in the world. And I said, well, wow, you're missing if he's fighting for the title and he wins, then he'll face Conor for this. And you laughed at me. You were like, no, he's not gonna bypass 170. And then I've had a couple days to think about this, and I'm like, you know what? Let me speculate. And what probably happened is I said this was probably the third fight. It was Conor was the first one, Diaz was the second one, and this was the third one, and was probably going to be at 180 pounds. And then the UFC, because I believe, just like you said, that GSP has no interest in fighting those other monsters. No interest at all. But he does have an interest in this fight. Said, okay, I'll go ahead and I'll do it at 185 instead of 180. He already knows where he's going, and that we know if he's back, the fight to make at some point is him and Conor. And that's probably where it's going.
Yeah, and I think you're left field on that, man. I don't understand why you ever predicted it would be George St. Pierre and Nick Diaz. There's no calling for that fight. There's no draw in that fight. There's no need to see that fight again. The first fight wasn't overly close. If you're just looking to sell some tickets, both of those guys sell tickets, so why put them together? Send Nick this direction and George in a different direction. Do 2 pay-per-views. You're going to do 900,000 to 1.1 with either one of those guys. So why put them together and still do the 900 to 1.1 in an insignificant fight that's not for a title or even a title contender? I never understood why you were predicting Nick Diaz, other than I know you're a big Nick fan and wanted to see that match. But as far as the Conor thing goes, I think you're out in left field on that one too. Your original prediction to me privately was that George goes out, he beats Bisping, then him and Conor fight. I'm going, well, Joel, that doesn't make any kind of sense. You had a little bit of a storyline when Conor goes from 45 to 55 and is successful, but he then can't go to 85. He'd have to stop by 170 first and be successful and then go up to 85. And even then it's a stretch, but it can be done. There's just simply no storyline here. If George goes and grabs the 85-pound title and then you want to make this mega fight with him and Conor, you could do it. You could throw him at 170 just to do it. It wouldn't hurt the 55-pound title, but it would hurt the 85-pound title should George lose. I think we're just talking crazy land there. That doesn't make any kind of sense. The most reasonable conclusion that you would have here is if George was to go out and beat Bisping, George is not going to want to fight some of those monsters that are cutting down to 185. George is 193 pounds the last time I worked out with him, and he's not in training camp. He's going to walk around about 187 once he's fully in shape, and that's going to be as simple as go to bed the night before weigh-ins and don't eat anything until you get off of the scale. He's not going to have to sweat out a single ounce, and some of those guys are just so big. And George has been in the workout room with Chris Weidman and trained with him, and it did just fine. I'm not saying he had any problems there, but what I'm saying is he does understand that there's a size difference, and I just don't predict that he'd want to run it back. And there's no reason for him to. He's got a ton of money. He's got a ton of fame. He's got a ton of memories and experiences. And if he can go get that 185-pound belt, and it is a good matchup for him. That's not to say that I even predict him as a winner. I mean, let's let this play out a little bit longer. But it is a good matchup for him.